Very early in my modeling career, I chose to only build models of ships and boats that relate to the history of my country, Trinidad and Tobago. This meant that I would spend a lot of time researching each project, but very early in the game, I realized that this was going to become quite difficult, as many of these vessels were not famous, and as such, finding data on them would prove to be very challenging. This presentation covers my research journey in finding enough factual, correct information to build a model of the steamship Naparima. I started collecting data in 2016. I first became aware of the steamship when I came across a repost in Facebook of an image of a coffee pot from a vessel from the Naparima that was originally posted by a gentleman called Bruce Locke way back in 2012. His grandfather, Herbert Locke, was a foreman for the Trinidad Railroad Company back in 1926, and he assisted in the salvage of the steamship Naparima following her accident and subsequent sinking. The coffee pot, made of Elkington silver plate, was given to him as a gift from the company for his efforts in assisting with the salvage operation. The coffee pot was recovered from the wreck. At the time, I was completely unaware of this ship, and I started my research on the internet, and to my surprise, found a number of responses. One of the first references I came across was from a gentleman, Ben Kaimarai. I'm not going to even try and get the pronunciation correct, but it was written in German, and it showed the first of 4 images of the vessel. I didn't have access to Google Translate at the time, so was unable to really read the article, but I've since had it translated and found that it was taken directly from an article published in the Engineering magazine of 1906. This took me to the Lloyd's Register, which identified a number of papers referencing the vessel. Lloyd's, as most of you know, keep a record of every ship that is registered. They also do service assessment work on behalf of a myriad of clients and normally keep these records online. The first Lloyd's survey report referred to the ship just after she arrived in Trinidad and commented on the work needed to make her ready for public service as she became part of the railroad transport network. This report was dated 6th of June, 1906. There were 6 other survey reports in total referencing service work required over the life of the vessel. This gave me much needed information on the construction, outfitting, and modifications made to the ship over time. I also wrote to Lloyd's asking if they had any additional information or reports, and they very kindly offered to send me a copy of articles published in the Engineering magazine referencing the vessel. The first article on the Naparima was written in March 1906. The second article, written the following month, was a 6-page detailed description of the vessel, including detailed drawings of the inner workings of the ship. It's quite rare to find this level of detail on almost any ship. The first image literally knocked my socks off, as it contained ship plans, which indicated to me that somewhere there must be copies of her original plans. It also contained a drawing of the ship as she was being prepared to sail across the Atlantic, which is that image on the bottom of that slide. The article also showed detailed drawings of the layout of the engine and its many components. There are 4 known photographs of this vessel. The first was found at the National Maritime Museum archives, and it shows the steamship on her steam trials in the Thames River. While my research had attracted interest on Facebook, I was presented with a second rare image of the steamship by Jill Chen of the Philatelic Society, stamp collectors, who had collected the stamp on the back of a postcard, and on the front was this image of the vessel. On a local scene, I then decided to visit the University of the West Indies, which has an excellent library, where I was presented with two photographs of the Naparima. The first one, shown here, supposedly shows the Naparima at the Port of Spain docks. However, it's very difficult to confirm the image of the vessel on the right, which is what they were indicating. The second, although identified in the library records as the Naparima, turned out to be the St. Patrick, the sister ship of the Naparima. There is a third photograph showing the vessel picking up passengers on the north end of the island, and I have no idea where I got this one from, but it would have come from a postcard. The final image was found in a historical book written by Father Anthony Duvertay on the history of the Western Islands, and the image was given to him by a local historian, Adrian Campins, who turned out to also be a family friend that I grew up with. Around the same time, I had been introduced to the curator of our National Archives, Roma Wangsang, who wonderfully allowed me full access to the local newspaper archives. It was here I was able to find an article on the ship's arrival, along with a number of other articles printed over the years. A basic history of the delivery of the vessel to Trinidad. The Naparima was skippered by a Captain Flanders and a crew of 14. She left England on the 19th of May, steaming on to the Canary Islands, where she topped up with coal and other supplies. Then she went on to Barbados, where she stopped briefly for supplies, arriving in Port of Spain on the 16th of July, some 28 days later. Over the 20 years that she served the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, there were many articles in the newspaper about special trips made to different ports, including some trips around the island and to the sister island of Tobago. In 1926, there were also a number of articles about her sinking, following extensive coverage of a commission of inquiry. I prepared a separate paper on the findings of the inquiry, which did shed a lot more light on the history of the ship and various things that she was made of. The accident in 1926 shows an image of the Van Dyke that collided with the Naparima and cut her stern in two. The details of the commission inquiry also led me to identify the possible location of the accident, a detail that was to add more interest in my search for further information on her construction and outfitting. What was particularly interesting to me was the actual accident itself. 12 people drowned, and one of the survivors, who swam to a rescue boat, turned out to be a relative of mine and was one of the key witnesses in the commission of inquiry. So the old proverb that life is full of circles has come full circle to me. The archives, I also found an article in the Jamaican newspaper, The Gleaner, which detailed the accident and gave some other information that was missing from the local newspaper. As word got out that I was researching the history of the ship, all sorts of information started showing up at my front door. At the left is a shipping schedule from 1908 showing that the boat only serviced the southern tip of the island. The second notice from a newspaper advertising back in 1921 again shows a vessel only servicing the southern end of the island. What is very interesting is it showed a turnaround time of each stop of half an hour. The relevance of that is today we have a brand new fast ferry. I think it costs $400 million. And the turnaround of that vessel is never less than 4 hours. However, further data and other photographs show that she in fact covered the entire west coast of Trinidad on a regular basis, and that little red line shows the route she traveled. In fact, she was so popular that the state ordered a second vessel, the St. Patrick, in 1913 to add additional capacity. The railroad only accessed the west coast at two major cities, one in Port of Spain in the north and San Fernando in the south. So the addition of these vessels greatly increased the ability to offer transportation to the entire west coast of the island in the early 1900s. While continuing the search on the internet, I came across this photograph taken at the Science Museum and showing a model of the sister ship, the St. Patrick. This led me to believe that the model could only have been built if actual ship plans existed somewhere. With all the excitement of data flowing in, I wrote to the National Maritime Museum in London, where I discovered 6 sheets of the original ship plans. They had never been copied, so I had to pay the lovely sum of £370 to have them digitalized. And these are the digital plans I received. Again, I could not believe my luck. This sheet shows a side elevation with the deck layouts of the main and upper decks. Details of the various sections which detail the rib layout of the hull. This is the galvanized sheet layout. These are the cabins, the lifeboat or gibs, the crew's quarters in the bow of the vessel. Yet with all this data that I had gathered, the plan still left many unanswered questions about some of the visible details on the ship. I asked a friend of mine, Jerry Lewis, who lived in London, to visit the National Maritime Museum and make copies of the photographs in the box ALB 1250. These were related to the Naparima and turned out to be the original photo, the first one I showed you, in the German article of the vessel in the sea trials in the Thames River. The top right is another vessel made by Thornycroft, and I'm still hunting to try and find the name of this vessel and where it was sent to. Very similar to the Naparima, but smaller. The bottom or lower photograph on the right-hand side shows coal being offloaded, and this is how the coal was actually delivered to most of the islands in the Caribbean. A very visible detail that I could not find any information on was the type and shape of her propellers. I did extensive research on the net and still could not find conclusive details on their shape. But part of the research took me to this vessel in New Zealand called the Euro-E, a restored steamship of similar design and date as the Naparima. And it shows a propeller shape that is distinct and different from what I used in the final model. And this is what she looked like when the restoration was completed with the internal bulkhead and frames. The internal frames here are exactly as shown in the sheet plans for the Naparima. My research led me to this wonderful gentleman. His name is Glenn Beeden, and he's a train enthusiast and historian who did extensive research on the railroads of Trinidad. In fact, he is the co-author of a book published in 2023, The Railroads of Trinidad and Tobago, and knew lots of details on the Naparima. He plans to include a chapter on the Naparima when he next publishes his second edition, using my research and, of course, the photographs of the model. I produced a wonderful video of our first meeting, which, if you're interested, you can see it on YouTube. He also supplied me with this picture at Cedros at the southern tip of the Naparima's journey. If you notice the height of the jetty in relation to the beach, hence the need for the ship to only have a draft of 3 feet. He estimates that the beach has lost at least 4 foot of draft since the service was discontinued. Now for some details that we were able to find out. She was ordered by the Crown agent and designed and built by John Thornycroft of Chiswick in 1904, launched in the Thames River in March 1905, and once in Trinidad was operated by the Trinidad Railroad Company. She carried 40 first-class passengers and 100 second-class passengers. She was 140 feet long, 21 feet wide, with a depth of 6 feet in a hole. She weighed 42 tons and carried a draft of only 3 feet. She could carry up to 40 tons of cargo. She was built of galvanized steel sheeting riveted onto mild steel frames. She had wooden decks and 7 watertight compartments. She carried 2 lifeboats and had 4 cranes, each capable of lifting 1 ton. She had 2 steam engines that produced a top speed of 30 knots and were also designed and built by Thornycroft. These engines were capable of producing 235 horsepower when ran at 500 RPM. They were powered by a water tube boiler, also designed and built by Thornycroft. Each engine had its own surface condenser. She used seawater in her boilers. These engines drove 2 propellers that were 2 feet 9 inches in diameter. Because of this shallow water in which the vessel was to operate, the propellers were housed in twin tunnels in her hull, which together with the rudder were installed above the bottom of the hull. As a result, you will see that it protruded above the waterline. However, once the boat started moving, water would move through the tunnels and would fill and completely submerge the propellers, making them quite efficient. While searching the internet, I came across this working model of the engine made by George Brentle in the UK. It is an identical engine to the one used in the Naparima. Details of this fine engine can be found on YouTube. It is made from a Stuart triple-engine expansion kit from Stuart Models. These photographs give you some idea of the detail and fantastic workmanship of John Brentle's work. Of course, I knew nothing about steamships, but I was able to find a reprinted copy of the Marine Steam Engine by Richard Sennett, which was first published in 1885. And I found it very useful in understanding steam engines, but still was struggling to find information on the Thornycroft firebox and boiler details. This is another image of a Thornycroft boiler at the time of her construction, but it really shows some resemblance to the plan. If you look at the image at the right, which is taken from the plan, though, they still don't quite match. And this was my attempt to build the boiler box and firebox from the data that I had. This is going to be an ongoing project with the hope of one day building a scale model of the inner workings of the engine and the boiler. Other details included research on steam whistles, and there are many, many variations. The image of the final arrangement of the steam whistle as it related to the drawings or plans. Then there were some long benches shown in the plans and used particularly on the upper deck. I couldn't find nothing on the net that matched this drawing, so I did the best I could from the drawings supplied. This is a detail that I hope to resolve if I'm ever able to dive on the wreck. And this was the final product. In the case of the benches with back supports, there are many images on the internet of typical benches of this nature that were used on steamboats at the time, and this is the one I chose to build. My daughter Lindsay, who is a qualified interior designer, kindly drew up the bench on CAD, and I had a friend paint both sides using a 3D printer. And this is what the bench looked like while fully assembled, and this is the final painted version. There are some details which match exactly to the drawings on the National Maritime Museum, and these were taken from the boat in New Zealand. More printed material on the Naparima that either I found, borrowed, photographed, or stole. Most interesting was the ticket for a single cabin that could be rented for 78 cents to take you from Port of Spain to Gaspery Island, a trip of 3 miles. Today, that trip would cost you quite a few $100s. Going back to the plans, one of the problems that I'm told is quite normal is when you get very old plans, they tend to warp. And in this case, many of the lines did not even match up. When they were printed from the digital image that I got from the National Maritime Museum, They also did not scale correctly. So I asked a friend of mine, John Otway, an architect and artist, to redraw the plans at a 1/4-inch scale. And these are the fantastic plans that he produced for me over a 3-month period. But the research continued. I was very lucky to have a close friend that owns a dive company and has a number of SUVs at his disposal. We used his sidebar scanner to transact the area where the ships had supposedly sank, and after a few hours got a hit in the vicinity of where we expected to find the wreck. If we are correct, it is located in 73 feet of water, but in an area that is continuously swept by 3 knots of current. We were only able to make one dive at the time, which was unsuccessful. We plan to try again at a better time of the year when the tide is slack and the visibility of the water better. In the meantime, I have completed a research paper on the vessel, on my research, and on the build process. I have also reproduced another report on the findings of the Commission of Inquiry, which details exactly how the accident happened. I was recently humbled that the Nautical Research Guild thought it worthy to publish my research paper in the Autumn 2024 journal. And here she is, the completed model at a 1/4-inch scale. Although there's much more that I could have done to make the model better, the model was supposed to be one of discovery, as many of the mistakes were made in her construction and then changed when some subsequent information was obtained. As a result, there are many parts of the model that I was not happy with the final finish. But there is a plan that sometime in the future, I will make a plank-on-frame model. But that is for another time when all the research is complete and I have no urgent model in my dockyards to build.